In this lesson, we're going to make a few adjustments before we actually conclude our work for the first shot. So let's begin. First of all, I'm going to adjust the focus distance of my camera because right now, if I split this window and enlarge this one, and in here you can see that the focus of this camera on this character isn't very accurate. So let's adjust that. For this, I'm going to unlock the sequencer, select my camera, and scroll down to focus settings. And I'm going to also split this window. Let's move somewhere around here. And I'm also going to enable my focus plane and open up this menu here. This is the focus distance. I'm going to move to frame number 0 and and add a keyframe. Let's move let's say somewhere around here, and let's adjust the focus distance to maybe somewhere around here. Let's move this playhead, and I'm going to adjust the focus plane again, maybe somewhere around here. And let's move the playhead again. And maybe adjust the focus somewhere around here. Okay, so let's see how this looks like. Yeah, we're going to have to add a keyframe in the middle. So let's add another keyframe here. There we go. And let's see how this thing looks like. Yeah, I think I should add another keyframe here. And let's see. Yeah, looks pretty good. Maybe just another keyframe here. There we go. And let's move this playhead again to maybe somewhere around here. And yeah, I think it looks good. Yeah, maybe add a keyframe here. Okay. Maybe let's add a keyframe here as well. Just about there. And yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Let's move the playhead here. Add a keyframe here. Looks pretty good. And yeah, I think so far so good. Maybe just add another keyframe. No, I think it looks good. Yeah, looks pretty accurate. Okay, yeah, looks pretty good. I'm gonna uncheck this box to disable the focus plane, and let me enlarge this window. And as you can see, now our focus looks a lot better, okay? Yeah. Okay, so let's save everything. And the next thing that I'm gonna adjust in here is the shutter speed. Now, you can also adjust the shutter speed in the post-process volume as well, but because the shutter speed is going to remain the same regardless of whatever the lighting setup you're using, so that is why I'm just going to adjust that in the camera, okay? So in the camera, I'm going to search for shutter speed, and here you can see we have this shutter speed slider. Let me move this thing up. Okay, so the shutter speed slider is going to allow us to control the motion blur of the animation. If I increase this number, because this is an invert slider, we're going to have a much shorter shutter speed and very little motion blur. But if I decrease the slider, we're going to have a comparatively larger shutter speed and comparatively more motion blur in the animation, okay? So in order to accurately adjust the shutter speed slider or the motion blur in the animation, there is actually a very simple formula, and that is the inverse of twice the frame rate. For example, in here I have 24 FPS. So for 24 FPS, I'm going to set the shutter speed of 48, okay? And then it's going to automatically divide 1 by 48 and give you an accurate shutter speed. One more thing that I'd like to mention in here is that this shutter speed slider also affects your exposure as well. But because right now in the post-process volume, I've set the exposure to auto. So that is why you don't see any sort of changes in here. But if I just go ahead and select the night scene and, select this post-process volume and go ahead to adjust and change this metering mode from auto to manual. Let me set a number in here, let's say 9. And then if I'll go into my camera settings and let me type in shutter speed, increase or decrease the slider, you can see that it also affects my exposure as well in this camera. But if I set the exposure to auto in the post-process volume, let's type in -2 in here, then the shutter speed is not going to have any sort of impact on the camera, okay? Now, if I'll go into my camera settings and, tweak this shutter speed slider, we're not going to have any sort of impact. So I'm going to type in 48 in here because my frame rate is 24, and by following a very simple formula, which is inverse of twice the frame rate, you can just multiply your frame rate by 2 and simply type in that number over here. So I'm going to save everything, and the next thing that I'm going to adjust in here is this cover. Let's replace this cover asset. So for this, I'm going to enlarge this window, go into the content browser and go into the Mission to Minerva folder. And to replace this asset, I'm going to go into geometries and let's scroll down. And of course, you can choose any asset you want, but I'm going to go ahead with this one. Okay, looks pretty huge at the moment, of course, but we can scale this down to maybe just about there and bring it over here. Move this thing up on Z, place it just about there. And I think I should rotate this thing like so. And then move this thing just about there. Okay. I'm going to delete this one and let's see how this thing looks like. Maybe I think I should move this thing on Y and move it here. Also, I'm going to have to move this thing up on Z as well. Let's see how this looks like in our shot. Oops, I forgot to lock the sequencer. I'm going to have to delete this keyframe and lock the sequencer. Yeah, let's do this again. It's pretty annoying. Yeah, I think I forgot to delete this from the sequencer. Let's lock this thing again and move it maybe, let's say, somewhere around here. I'm going to rotate this thing like so. And maybe move this thing just about there, I guess. Yeah, I think somewhere around here. Let's move this thing up on Z. And I'm going to scale this down to maybe, let's say, 0.12. And bring it down here. And let's change the orientation to local. And I'm going to move this thing here. And let's see how this thing looks like in our shot. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Yeah, it looks pretty well. Of course, you don't necessarily have to choose this asset. You can choose any asset you want, but I'm just going to go ahead with this one. Okay. Now, one more thing that I'd like to mention in here is that if I enlarge this window and let me just hide the night scene. I'm going to hide the night scene and enable the night scene that I have for path tracing. And let's give it some time to clear up all the noise. Okay, so in here you can see that we have a lot of fireflies in the scene, especially with these Minerva assets. We have a few fireflies in here. We have a cluster of fireflies in here, and in here as well. We have a few of these on this character as well. And in one of the previous lessons, I did show you how you can, get rid of these fireflies. You can simply just go ahead and select the post-process volume, go into the path tracing settings. Let me just type in path tracing in here and, decrease the maximum path exposure to 1. And now comparatively, as you can see that we have a lot less fireflies in the scene with these assets, but we still have a few of them. So how to get rid of these remaining fireflies? Now to get rid of these fireflies, what you can do is you can select these assets, open up the material properties and fractionally increase the roughness. And hopefully that will resolve this problem. Just make sure that you don't change the roughness too much, because we don't want to destroy the dynamics of the asset itself. We just want to get rid of these fireflies. So make sure that you keep your changes to minimal. Okay. Now, because this is a very simple but pretty lengthy process, so that is why I cannot demonstrate this thing on camera. But you can very easily just go ahead and adjust that yourself. All you have to do is to select the assets and, select the static mesh from here, open up the material instance. And if it doesn't have the roughness slider, just open up the parent material and, bring in a multiply node. I'm going to press and hold M on the keyboard. And then I'm also going to bring in a scalar parameter, and let's rename this as roughness, connect it with P. I'm going to connect this green channel with this one because this is an ARM texture, and I'm going to connect this node with roughness. Okay, so I'm going to now save this parent material, come out of this one, and now you can see that we have this roughness slider in here, and we can simply just tweak this roughness slider to add a little bit of roughness to these materials. Okay, but because there are a lot of materials in here and each asset has a lot of static meshes to work with, let me just select this one, and you can see that we have a lot of static meshes for this asset only, and each static mesh has its own list of materials. That is why it's a pretty lengthy job to, select the material and decrease the roughness manually of each asset, of each static mesh, of each material. So I'm leaving this up to you as an assignment so that you can work on that for yourself. So that concludes the working for the first shot. Of course, we still have to go through the render settings as well, but we'll do that in a separate section after discussing the remaining shots, okay? So that's pretty much it for today's lesson. I hope you have enjoyed your journey so far with cinematics in Unreal. I've said this before and I'll say it again. If you have any sort of confusion so far, or if you have any sort of doubt, or if you'd like me to repeat anything or explain anything further, please reach out to me and do let me know. So that's pretty much it for today's lesson, and I'll see you guys in the next one.